All right, AP World. It was probably always bound to come down to this, and well, here's how it goes. Which is to say that we'll finish off our last of all of our notes in video format, rather, the good old-fashioned way together in class. So I'm going to drag you through Unit 9 here real fast. It's one, two, three, four slides. Four slides. But they're packed, so I'm gonna roll through this as quickly as I can, and hopefully not too fast. Okay, so globalization after 1900 is what we've got here, and so where I'm going to start you off is just this. All right, if you were in AP Hug last year, this is PTSD all over the place because you guys got pretty familiar with globalization. World studies, folks, this is new terminology for you. But bottom line, there you go. That is a working definition of what globalization is. And so it is just kind of the sense that the world has become smaller as technology has improved. And we always come back to those two basic ideas: transportation and communication. Right, those are the things that have made the world seem smaller because it's now we're more easily able to get from place to place, and communications, we can communicate with people on the other side of the world instantaneously versus just even a century ago where you were still had to write letters and yeah, so that's kind of the basic concept there. Okay, and so this unit pretty much focuses on how globalization has changed the world here in the 21st century. So I'm going to start you off with advances in technology and exchange. Okay, and so communications and transportation, we can pretty much talking about well, kind of what I've got examples of going on here. Um, when we talk about shipping, instead of old ships, now we've got these cargo bearing aircraft like you see there. Communications, we go through the 20th century up to now. And really, again, remember this unit is 1900 to close to present, I guess, as we get. But when it comes to communications, we can talk about the advent of radio, the invention of television, and then the internet, and then on to smartphones here in the 21st century. Okay, Green Revolution. Again, AP Huggers, I could stand by and you could teach about this. Green Revolution was when we had a series of scientific advances to agriculture, growing crops, and so the creation of chemical fertilizers, chemicals to pesticides, things like that. The whole goal behind the Green Revolution was in the years after World War II was to reduce hunger, world hunger, and to make sure that there was going to be enough food for people to eat when it comes to agriculture and the growing of crops. So yeah, hybrid plants, genetic engineering, all this kind of stuff was all part of the Green Revolution. Starts in kind of the 1960s, 70s, and some people would say there's still variations of it still going on to this day. Okay, energy technology. When we get into here, we're talking about really kind of going from coal, which was still a dominant energy source at the beginning of the 1900s, and then how that has shifted from petroleum to we have nuclear power, and by that I mean for domestic use, not making nuclear weapons, but nuclear energy. And nowadays we experiment with solar energy, whether it's wind, the wind turbines that you see there, pictured, or solar panels to capture the sun and turn that into energy. So lots of changes in that technology. Medical innovations. Oh my goodness. So we can go back to early 20th century, the eradication of malaria, tuberculosis, cholera. As the century goes on, polio, smallpox, all that sort of thing that that we see going on when it comes to kind of changes in all that. Matter of fact, here let me actually I meant show there antibiotics, vaccines, that kind of thing. I probably am kind of jumping around, and D and A there could kind of come together. So those things that I mentioned, diseases that have been wiped out. All right, went through the whole list. I'm not going to go through it again, but um, you know. And then poverty mentioned there, because we know that there's linkage that people in various parts of the world, including our own country, who live in poverty, the lower that poverty level is, the higher the evidence of disease. That there's gonna be more of that kind of a thing going on. And so yeah, that's what we're talking about there. Sorry, a little bit of kind of combining D and A together there. Epidemics that have been emerging, kind of the emergence of what we call like super strains. Later in the 20th century, we see AIDS and HIV become a killer. For a period of time, medications now that can control that. Ebola, another disease that was something that was new to us as we got toward the later part of the 20th century. Heck, even COVID here in the early part of the 21st century would be an example of emerging epidemics or pandemics in that case. And and scientists identify these as like super strains of various kinds of viruses and that sort of thing. Okay. And then what we're also seeing is longevity diseases as we get older, and it's kind of that precedence of seeing like arthritis, stroke, heart disease, Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease. Those are all kinds of diseases that we see happening more and more because we live longer. Didn't have the same impact going back 100 years, 150 years ago, because we had shorter lifespans. But as medical innovations have created an environment where we can live, into our 80s, into our 90s, much more so than in the past. We see the rise of these longevity diseases. Okay. Let's see, section 3, technology and the environment. All right, we'll get right into causes of environmental change, which is going to be things like deforestation, where we cut down trees and we don't replant. Desertification, which is when you're not using good land management practices and you end up turning, what should be arable land that you can use for agriculture, and it turns into desert. All right. Air quality issues, and issues that we see around the globe where air quality is decreasing. Population growth gets thrown into the mix with this. Urbanization, as more and more people kind of spread out to the suburbs. And then industrialization that continues on through the 20th century. More and more countries, manufacturing industries, factories, that sort of thing. All right. And here next. All right, and then when we talk about the effects of some of that environmental change, we've seen resource depletion, water scarcity, the increase in greenhouse gases that impact our atmosphere. Again, that's where we bring in to try to combat some of this renewable energy sources like wind, like solar energy, and just kind of trying to increase environmental awareness as part of all that. All right. Global warming and climate change debates. This is something that still goes round and round and round. Back in 2015, we end up with the Paris Agreement, which is a number of countries, 186, I think, at one point, who all combined together to try to face the idea that it's kind of hard to ignore that our planet is slowly warming. You see Greta Thunberg there, kind of one of the activists involved with all of this. The Paris Agreement, but there's people who claim that this research is exaggerated, that it's been kind of manipulated, and that climate change really isn't happening, that we're just looking at natural cycles in the climate, and that even though our planet seems to be warming now, that somewhere in the future it'll start cooling again, and that we just kind of go through these cycles. And so it is a debate. It is controversial. You have, probably more scientists than not globally that say, no, there's something going on and it's human created, but there's a lot of pushback on it as well. Okay. And, a matter of fact, an example of that is that, when President Trump was in for his first term, he withdrew the United States from the Paris Agreement. When Joe Biden was elected in 2020, he brought us back into the Paris Agreement. And now with Trump as president again, you can guess where things are going. Okay. So, it's those kinds of things that take place there. All right, economics in the global age. All right, let's run through this one. So, free market economics. Yeah, we have seen. Oh, hold on, dog outburst here. We can get things back under control. Anyhow, uh, 20th century, all right, up to present. Yes, we see more overall liberalization of economic policies when it comes to trade. In other words, we see more open markets, less restrictions, going back to good old laissez-faire that Adam Smith argued for way back there in good old kind of Enlightenment times. And so that's been a trend. Okay, well, let's see, what else do we have here? Knowledge economy. So this is where we get more into communications and information technology. Some people argue that in the United States, as we've moved beyond being mainly a manufacturing country, we're more of a kind of service-based and education-based economy. This kind of gets into some of that, into what they call kind of like almost post-industrial countries like our own. This gets into like computing and software, all that kind of stuff. Is wrapped up into what we call knowledge economies. And there are billions of dollars that are made off of those things. All right. Let's see, moving it on. There we go. Shifts in manufacturing. So what have we seen? Well, you go back to the 20th century, early 20th century, especially right up to the middle. And highly developed countries like the United States, like a lot of Western European countries, did a lot of manufacturing. But as time went on and cost of things started to go up, you started to see this shift where highly developed countries like our own began to move manufacturing to what we call less developed countries. A lot of times, like maybe in Asia, Africa, Southeast Asia, places like that, where there's cheap labor. And bottom line, these companies are looking for, they're companies, so they're going to make money. It's about profit, right? And so they're looking for where they can get things made and have to pay employees the least amount of money. And so that's where you get this shift going to other places, okay? Which is why we've seen so much manufacturing leave a country like the United States. If you're going to pay an American, an hourly wage in one of those factories, you're going to be paying them $30, $40 an hour. Shift it off to an Asian country, and you can pay them $3, $4 an hour, okay? There's a bit of a difference there, and that difference is pure profit for the company, right? And again, these manufacturers, they're not in it because, they feel like, here you go. We need these things. They're in it for money, for profits, make the world go round, okay? We've talked about that from time to time in this class. We've also seen the rise of these transnational, which means are all over the world. Transnational means organizations that may be headquartered in one place, but they represent entities all over the globe. Free trade organizations, okay? Probably one of the biggest is the WTO, the World Trade Organization. Very, very controversial organization because there are many, many countries who believe that it really, really favors big, powerful countries. The traditional powers, again, Western Europe, the United States, and that it kind of tries to stack the deck, economically speaking, so that smaller, less developed countries can't, kind of like join the club of the rich and powerful countries. And so, we have those trade organizations, but sometimes, a little bit of controversy that rolls with that. Some of this even gets tied in with the UN. The UN has, they have departments of economic development that look at free trade and, again, try to aim at, a little bit more equality when it comes to trade. But still an area that, it's kind of hit and miss. Okay, we've also seen the rise in multinational corporations in the 20th and going into the 21st century. So remember, way back in the day, we had our joint stock companies. Now we're all the way up to Microsoft and Google and Apple. These massive businesses that have factories all over the place that get into controversies because a lot of times we find out from time to time they're making use of child labor. They're doing business in countries that have terrible governments that treat their people horribly, but the labor is cheap. You get those kinds of things going on. It's a trend that we've seen just kind of build and build as we move through the 20th century and here into the 21st century. All right. And let's see. Section 5. We're just moving right along here. Reform and response. So what do we talk about with this one? Well, let's get us into what we refer to as this era of rights, okay? And as we've gone through the 20th century and into the 21st century, we've seen this move towards more political rights, granting of, voting rights to more and more people. Remember, back in the day, it was white males who owned property. By the time you're reaching the end of the 20th century, you don't have to own property. You don't have to only be white, and you don't only have to be male in the vast majority of the world, okay? So you have that. You have growing religious freedom. So the right to worship as you want in more and more countries. Not saying 100% total. There's still going to be some countries that have a lot of have religious restrictions, as they do have some of those restrictions that I just mentioned about it was some of these other rights. But we've seen overall a trend towards seeing more of this than less. Okay. We can throw in racial rights. So, when it comes like in our own country, civil rights, things like that, gender rights, all right? And again, and I know a lot of these, they get kind of packed in, they get controversial. They get into, what here in America we call culture wars and all that sort of thing. But again, if we're looking big picture, if we step back, look at big picture, it's been an era through the 20th century where these rights have been expanded, okay? Let's focus in on gender equality itself because we've brought it up from time to time back in those early days, always talking about the power of the patriarchy, and by no means am I suggesting that's gone. But if we are trying to be optimistic and looking at the big picture, we have seen a trend towards more gender equality over time. Plenty of room to grow, even in our own country. Plenty of room to grow. We still live in a country where women with the same level of education, same level of work experience, are still paid less on average than men who have the same credentials. So, even in a country like ours, we still have room for improvement. But overall, been going in that direction, okay? Same we can talk about with racial equality. I throw a picture of Nelson Mandela up there. And the story of South Africa and apartheid, a system that it was part of the basic makeup of South Africa for decades, is that whites and blacks were separate by law, and whites had all these advantages, and blacks had what scraps were left over to them. In the 1980s and 1990s, that finally collapsed. And apartheid, this legal system of separating of races in South Africa, was finally banished, and has led to a world where during the years of apartheid, South Africa, even though the white population in South Africa was this tiny majority, they were always the leaders, political leaders of the country. Since apartheid, it's been black leaders, representative of the fact that the vast majority of the population is black, okay, indigenous people of Africa. You could also make the argument with racial equality looking at the civil rights movement in the United States, okay? Guys like Martin Luther King Jr. and the work that they did to bring about civil rights and breaking down things like, segregation of schools, segregations of society that were in parts of our country. And so you see that trending as we go through the 20th century and making the turn into the 21st century. Okay. What else do we have? It's not all been good news. We've also seen examples of human repression. whether we talked about with China, we can look at that one child policy they had. For those of you that didn't take AP Hug, that was a stretch of time in the 80s when trying to fight back on overpopulation, the Chinese government told their people you can only have one kid. That's it. And the Chinese culturally preferred to have boys. And so we started hearing all kinds of nightmare stories about girls being dumped in orphanages, infanticide, which is the killing of babies, baby girls, so they could get boys, just all kinds of terrible stuff. And then fast forward to 1989, Tiananmen Square. We talked about that at one time in one of the classes, I think, but it was kind of came up just randomly. But a basically a freedom movement that breaks out, especially amongst young people in China, and is brutally shut down in June of 1989 when the Chinese government sends their military in to break up the protests that were going on. The Uyghurs, which are a Muslim subset in Western China, there's also a lot of evidence that they have been treated poorly by the Chinese, some even alleging genocide. Tibet, Nepal, parts that are under control of China, and where there's been freedom movements that have been pushed back on by the Chinese, that kind of stuff. So I'm really really leaning on China here as the example of some of these human rights repression, but they're not the only ones out there. We've seen examples in other parts of the world as well, but Chinese are just a good example if you need to pull it out there because there's so many elements of that repression. All right, let's see with when we talk about steps towards environmental repair, there's been the whole kind of movement towards reuse, recycling. That's a big part of that. Ecotourism, which is something that has grown in the 21st century, where people who go on vacation, they get to see the natural wonders, but they also learn about how those countries that they're visiting are trying to protect their environment. And so just more general overall environmental awareness. The organization Greenpeace, which looks to do everything from protecting threatened like species like whales and things like that, and just more awareness of the fact that our interactions with the environment through history have usually resulted in the environment taking a beating, and that we need to take it back the other way. All right. There is that. And then globalized culture, section 7 here. We'll look at this in terms of kind of looking at a lot of kind of different ways here. We can talk about we've seen these changes. I'm struggling to kind of get my description of this, but in effect, the world being brought closer together. Whether it's been politically, again, more social rights, more diversity, those kinds of things. We're at a strange little precipice here in 2025 with whether that's going to continue to be the case. But that's not going to be something that pops up on the AP test. Okay. Again, our main focus is trends writing out through the end of the 20th century and right at the turn of the 21st century. And that is what we see more of going on. Okay. Let's see, for B, there's the idea of global consumers, that we now, back in the day, most of what we bought was made here in the USA. Now we're buying stuff from all over the globe, and it's the same everywhere else. Okay. As far as how that goes, and then pop culture, whether you're looking at K-pop, whether you're looking at the Beatles, that instead of just consuming, culture or, entertainment from your own country, the whole world is open to it. Okay. So a little bit of that growing as well. Right. And then culture and religion. We've seen, a growth of because of communications, where more awareness of global culture. We've seen the spread of religions happen more quickly during the 20th century. Those kinds of things going on. All right. And then let's see, Section 7, resistance to globalization. We'll take a look at that in kind of the anti-globalization movement. That's something that is alive and well right now in 2025. The big call for tariffs right now is a pushback on globalization, and to say that by interacting so deeply with the rest of the world, we've actually paid a price for that. We kind of got a little hint of that during the COVID pandemic, when suddenly we couldn't get the things we needed, and we're used to trading from other countries. Remember, getting ready to murder each other over toilet paper rolls and stuff like that. And one of the lessons that a lot of Americans took away from that is there can't be too much globalization. And when you're so dependent on other countries for things you need to live by, what happens when there's a disaster and you can't get access to those things? And so, that's where some of the push to, bring back some of the manufacturing back to the United States, that's where that comes from. And, jury's still out to see as to, well, how that's going to end up playing out. All right. And I guess I just got ahead of myself there because, yes, causes for resistance. I guess I just kind of gave them to you there. Okay, whether it is again just this idea that becoming too dependent, on others. Okay, and then we see some of the whether it's rises in poverty, environmental destruction, things like that. They kind of get caught into the mix of all of it. And then economic resistance. With that, we just are getting more into this idea of that we need to bring the economics back home. That we need to become more self-reliant. Those kinds of ideas. Okay. And then definitely we've seen the rise of anti-globalization with the rise of social media. Anti-globalization. I guess I looking at Weibo over there on the right side. China's kind of own response to Facebook. China controls its social media tightly. They don't, really, we can look at social media as another aspect of globalization because we're able to interact with people all over the globe, unless you're in China. Okay, if you want to get back to your human rights repression, the Chinese government controls social media there, and so they limit who you're able to have access to as you kind of communicate and get information from. All right, and then as we get down to the end of this, institutions of the globalized world. Well, we've already talked about the United Nations. That is going along strong. The United Nations plays a strong role in encouraging human rights. It was back in the 70s that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was declared, a series of kind of goals that we as together are continuing to work on. The UN and peacekeeping missions. This is when countries that belong to the UN basically donate troops who can go into dangerous parts of the world, civil wars, famines, where they can go in and try to bring some order out of the chaos that might be going on because of those things. They put on that blue UN helmet, and they're representing the United Nations, all right? And then the UN has also played a really significant role in fighting back against hunger, poverty, refugee crises around the world, trying to promote health and education, those sorts of things. And then outside of the United Nations, because it's not all just the United Nations, there are a lot of what we call non-governmental organizations, NGOs. And those can be everything like Amnesty International, World Vision, Save the Children. These are organizations that are not attached to any government. They're almost kind of like charitable organizations that people donate to. Some governments might give them grant money, and then they work globally to do everything from focusing on social issues that impact children, making sure that food is getting to places that might be experiencing famine, all of that kind of business. All right. And let's see, that gets us to the end. That's it. Okay. So it didn't take me quite 30 minutes to cover an entire unit. And if you're feeling like I didn't give you enough, hey, I would strongly encourage you, jump into some of Steve's, or Emily Gankler does a pretty good video that you'll find on one of those resource sheets with all the links. I wouldn't just go completely 100% on what Floyd just shared with you here in less than 30 minutes. Again, there's a far less likelihood of a lot of this information showing up on the AP test, but there's no way I'm going to tell you that there isn't going to be any. Okay, so there we go. That is the end of your note nightmare for 2024-25 AP World History. It's over.